Hello and welcome back. My name is V and today I'd like to make yet another video and talk a little bit more about the Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail MSQ. Last week I made a video about Ffxiv in particular and I got some interesting comments, and I see that a lot of you feel like she in general wasn't a very good character. This time around I would like to discuss the MSQ and the pacing of the game in general and kind of try to figure out where things went wrong. So I have my own thoughts on what I didn't like in MSQ, and it's very unlike me to make a video where I'm just consistently going to be trashing something. And I don't feel like I am. I try to be as objective and as realistic as I possibly can when it comes to this. Final Fantasy XIV is a beloved game to me, and I would not be where I am today without it. My community, and most of my community actually, wouldn't exist without FF14, and as a content creator I wouldn't have grown into the person that I am today if this game wasn't around during 2020, 2021 for me. And I love it. I really love the game. I am so incredibly sad because of some things that I am about to say, but I want to believe that offering constructive criticism rather than just trashing things for no reason or for just clout or attention is not the way to go. So I'm going to try and stick to the point and talk about the things that I thought could have been done better. If you happen to be new here on the channel, make sure to subscribe, leave the video a like, and let me know in the comments how you felt about the MSQ, which things you like, which things you didn't like, and most importantly what you thought about the pacing, as that is mostly what I'm going to talk about. So I guess the biggest impression that FF14 Dawntrail left on me is that I felt like I played two different games in Dawntrail. Maybe this is because I took a break when I finished the level 95 MSQ and I didn't play for about 2 months or so, but then I came back and I felt like it was a good time to take a break because the game suddenly completely changed. I felt like there were two different stories altogether. From level 90 to level 95, we were dealing with this Game of Thrones situation where Ffxiv was fighting for the throne and whatnot. And I have to say, I remember very little from this part of the game already. Some of these stories related to people who live in and around Tuliyollal, how they perceive natural events, how they look at death and grief, and all these philosophies, they were interesting to hear, but not as memorable as I would have hoped. I don't remember any of the particular names or characters or anything of the sort, and I feel like I would have to get myself through Dawntrail again to actually remember some of them. 96 to 100 felt a lot better, but it did feel like a completely different game. I liked the story about the dome, liked the references regarding FF9 and who Sphene was representing, who Otis was representing. I think there were some pretty incredible, remarkable characters, but there were some giant flaws in this part of the story as well that just made me have a really hard time connecting to the game. I like feeling like the expansion is a singular experience, and I think that this is something that they were very good at in Shadowbringers and in Endwalker and even in the previous games. This one just felt like a lot of world building, but the world building was all over the place. And it just didn't feel coherent. It didn't feel like they were trying to tell us a singular story, unless that story was, of course, about Ffxiv. Ffxiv seemed to have been an integral part of this story, and even though the first and the second part of the game were so different, she was just always there. And some of you in my previous video have brought up that she had, I guess, the third highest number of all of the lines since the Realm Reborn, which is quite excessive. So I think anyone who's saying that Ffxiv didn't talk too much during Dawntrail didn't really play Dawntrail because she objectively has the most dialogue. And if she was a super beloved character and not jarring at all, it could have been an incredible expansion to begin with if we were able to establish this sort of emotional connection with this character and completely fall in love with them and be invested in their story. That would have been fine, but I don't think that many people felt this way about Wuklamot. Another thing that I really disliked about the story is how the thing that I was dreading the most came true in the later part of the MSQ. So we met Sfine, and Sfine was this cute little girl that wanted to protect her kingdom. She was kind, she had these really sweet gestures and mannerisms, and I said to myself and to Neon and to everyone who would listen, please, let's just not make another Meteion out of her. This is a story that we loved. This is the trope that I feel belongs in Endwalker and should stay in Endwalker. And I thought that it would really cheapen the story of Dawntrail if they tried to do the same thing with Sfine. So I was going through the story really hoping that they wouldn't just use a cute little girl and turn her into a monster again, and it's almost unbelievable to me that they did exactly that. So I sat there playing through the MSQ as my disappointment was growing, realizing that that is exactly where the MSQ is going, and it would have been a great idea if we hadn't seen that in the last expansion. So I can't believe that someone in the development team said, okay, this worked once, surely this will work for the second time, and players won't mind at all that they're playing through essentially the same story for the second time, just worse. So, as I'm currently unrolling the MSQ videos and highlights here on the channel, you will notice that I've had a decent amount of fun playing the game, and I really honestly wanted to believe that it's just going to be a good experience, that the payoff of the MSQ is going to be good because Final Fantasy XIV has historically been good at that. Then I went back to edit these videos so that I can publish them on the channel, and I noticed a staggering amount of times when I felt like I had to cut out a part of the footage where my face was visible, and I was almost ashamed of myself as a content creator. Even though I remember being a little bit ill and a little bit tired during this time, I caught myself almost falling asleep so many times, and it just feels shameful and disgraceful to publish this kind of footage in front of you. I didn't go overboard with editing this footage, and I'm sure that if you wanted to have a little bit of fun with it, you could go through my MSQ videos and see what I'm talking about. And I wish I had the patience to go and cut out every single time when I felt like I was bored or snoozing a little bit or something like that. It just didn't feel good. Maybe it was because it was the first time Neon and I were playing it offline and there was no chat interaction in the second part of the MSQ, but that didn't make it boring. I felt like I should have felt engaged in these key moments of the story, and some of the key moments just felt like a snooze fest, and that I think is a big shame. When I do think about these emotional moments in the story, I felt like the only ones were the ones that were related to the characters that we already know. I teared up when we had that gondola ride with Grahatia, when Kryl was saying goodbye to her parents, even when Aaronville was saying goodbye to his mother. Although we didn't know his mother that well, we knew him as a character, and I felt like that was important. And I think there's a very important lesson to be learned there, that these emotional connections don't just spawn overnight, and that a character has to be truly remarkable for us to start feeling for that character in 10 or 15 or 20 hours of playtime. And maybe the FF14 writing team got a little ahead of themselves, realizing that in Endwalker they threw Meteion into the story, and Meteion had this fantastic reception. So maybe they thought, okay, FF14 player base, as a player base, they're kind of emotional, they get attached to characters, they can relate, they listen to these stories and enjoy them, and maybe we got a little underestimated, and maybe we got seen as players who will just take any story and enjoy it. But Wuklamot's story had about 50 hours, and I don't think that there's a lot of people who actually related to her and to her attitude, to her story, to the lack of character changes that she had, even though she had so many opportunities for growth. It just wasn't the same, and we didn't get attached to her. And I only ever felt emotional when it came to the characters that I've already been invested in. In that sort of way, I felt like they used some of the scions and people who we knew before, and they cheesed these emotional moments by giving us something to look at with a lot of nostalgia. And yet the ending itself of the game felt so abrupt and unexpected that I was just completely caught off guard. I almost couldn't believe that the game ended, because I just sat there and expected some sort of big moment, some emotion that I would feel, and the credits started rolling, and I just wasn't sure if I was playing Final Fantasy XIV anymore. My Final Fantasy XIV, it just felt like it was cut. The game ended, and fortunately at that point I was behind on the MSQ, so I had 7.1 to play through. But if I played 7.0 at launch, and if that was how the game ended, I am pretty sure I would have been quite disappointed, because there was almost no emotional impact on me at the end of the game. And I feel like after players award your game with 40 to 50 hours of gameplay, you owe them something. Not necessarily emotional damage or something like that, but something to make the ending memorable. I finished the game 3 weeks ago, and I can hardly remember what happened at the end of the game. And if you ask me to tell you a story from beginning to the end of what happened in Dawntrail, I'm not really sure I can. From the combat standpoint, I also felt that it was so strange that we had some trials early on, and then we didn't have a trial for a very, very long time. Admittedly, we had about 2 dungeons in between, but it just felt like it wasn't enough. The story was lackluster, and then once we got to the trial, it felt like it was a bit underwhelming. So essentially what we ended up doing is fighting the 2 emperors or empresses of the dome. So we fought Eorzea and Ffxiv, and then before that we fought some random creature that came out of an icy box, whatever the thing that it was in, and that's pretty much all that I remember. So the trials themselves weren't as impactful. When I compare that to the experience of, let's say, Endwalker, where we had Zodiac, we had Heidelin, and so many of these iconic fights, it's just not possible to compare the 2 expansions. I'm not really trying to, considering that you can't expect the beginning of a new story to be as impactful as the ending, but this just wasn't it. I can't put my finger on it completely, but it just felt like it missed a mark for me. Also, even though I mentioned that some of these moments with scions were created to invoke this feeling of nostalgia and emotions and whatnot, I felt like for the most part in the MSQ, the relationship with them was cheapened. We went through so much in Heavensward, Stormblood, Realm Reborn, Endwalkers, Shadowbringers, just to end up in this new strange land where we're doing cooking quests again for half an hour, not talking about anything meaningful, and in essence acting like we've only just met scions and didn't have any conversations with them. Not us saving the world with Thancred and Urianger and whatnot, to just end up having them on the opposite side of the conflict and never really sitting down to discuss anything, really. I didn't feel like we've come back to rebuild these friendships with people who we haven't seen in a very long time. And then we just ended up all together on this different continent, this different place with a different mission, and we just acted like nothing ever happened. It was just a weird pacing of the story, and it felt like they were all there to help us feel things, but then their roles in the whole story were just really cheap. And when I say this, I am talking specifically about Cryle. I feel like the story of Cryle was largely oversold before the release of Dawntrail, and we were promised that Cryle would be this very important part of the story, that she would get a lot of attention, that we would learn more about her heritage. And to be fair, we did. All of these things did happen, but they happened in about 20 minutes overall of gameplay, and that's counting the cutscenes. I feel like Cryle wasn't the centerpiece of this expansion at all, and I was really looking forward to Cryle being our little hero for once, as she suffered so much with feeling like she had no particular role, and then in Dawntrail she got to experience essentially a new job and being the staple for Pictomancer, which was great. But then we ended the expansion and I don't feel like she had some sort of massive character growth. Sure, she got a new job, she met her parents and everything, but at the end of the day, she didn't really become who she was supposed to be, in my opinion at least. She was just there as a promise that was made to us by the dev team. They promised us Cryle, they gave us Cryle, but Cryle was in no way, shape or form important in the MSQ. And I don't even want to get into the obvious discrepancies in the lore when it comes to this golden city, how it was discovered before, but then we were rediscovering it. It was just a story that made very little sense to me. Lastly, this is just a pet peeve of mine, but I'm sure that there's a lot of people who share my opinion on this. I cannot for the life of me name a single zone, and I can name very few characters from Dawntrail. And I feel like if you want people to start talking about your game, you have to make it possible for them. By throwing in a bunch of names that look like someone was really angry because they had to stay longer on a Friday afternoon and they just rolled their fingers on a keyboard to create a name for a certain city or a certain character, you're not really helping it make it memorable. And I think that this is one of the foundations of marketing. Even as a content creator who was watching a ton of YouTube videos and tutorials and guides on how to be more memorable and more successful as a content creator, one of the golden rules of creating names when it comes to Twitch names, YouTube channels and such is having short, catchy names that people would remember and that people would be able to talk about. And someone on the dev team seemingly has just forgotten about all of the marketing principles, because now even if I wanted to talk about a zone, and let's say that zone is the blue zone that really reminds me of the forest in Final Fantasy X, I for the life of me can't remember what the zone is called. The Wild Wild West zone will always be a Wild Wild West zone for me. Golden City thankfully is a golden city, but I don't remember the name of the last zone that we were in that was divided into 4 zones that had all their separate names. And maybe this was just me just having finished the MSQ and not really having any time in game after that, but I feel like I should remember at least some of these names and I just don't. And apart from Wuklamat, Gulul Jaja, Zoral Ja, and some of these characters who were pushed heavily onto us, like Sveen, and Sveen, by the way, has a catchy name, that's a fact, I can't remember anyone, and it's making it very difficult for me to decide to talk about it. I really didn't want to make this a rant video, and I'm so sorry that I had to sit in front of a camera for 20 minutes and talk about things that I feel are extremely negative about the game that I've loved for many years now. But I feel like I have to give my feedback, and I want to be a part of the voices that will say, we don't like this. We don't want to be underappreciated as players and as customers. We need better, more meaningful stories. We need characters who aren't going to be pushed onto us in such a jarring way that they just smother everything around them, and we need to feel like we are characters in our own stories and not just babysitters. Babysitting in Endwalker was a little bit different. We spent some time with Meteon, who was clearly a child. It was adorable, it was nice, and we finished that story, and I felt like it was an amazing conclusion of a story and a trope that shouldn't be repeated in a very long time. Because in a way, I feel like Dawntrail is offending Endwalker by trying to copy it and the story and failing spectacularly at it. I feel like we need new stories and we need characters that are actually just likable, and I don't think we're asking for much as players. What's your opinion on this? Let me know in the comments, and if you're new here on the channel, make sure to subscribe, leave the video a like if you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching, take care, and bye bye.